All right, welcome to I Get to Decide, our very first podcast. I Get to Decide is the premier podcast of Invest Black, a racial equity firm based out of Philadelphia, run by yours truly, Dennis Maurice. I'm glad to be joined here today by Arnold Ford.
It's a
The
pleasure.
crowd goes wild.
I hear him.
There's no
I
crowd.
hear
So we'll put a clap track on the back. Arnold, I'm glad to be here with you. Let me tell everybody what I know of you, and then I want you to just elaborate whatever I miss.
Sounds good.
So I met you. I think we now know this is now about 22 years ago.
22
years ago when you came to Lincoln from University of Delaware. I know a few things. Let me rattle them off.
Come on.
One, you're a preacher's kid.
Yes, sir.
You are currently a preacher/minister.
That's right.
Okay. You are an educator of about 17 years.
That's right.
Okay. You are pedagogically studied in Black Studies and History at the Lincoln University, the nation's first HBCU in the world.
Talk heavy.
You have a master's in educational leadership. You are now world renowned, I would say, for embracing a curriculum of love at your current employer, where you serve as assistant principal.
That's right.
Of Mass Street Charter School's main campus. And you are a lover of music, a musician, and Yaden's most famous Kappa. Am I correct?
The only one I would debate is that last one. It's a lot of Kappas in Yaden, but
I don't know none of them.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
But I think those are the things. But what's most important about what I know of you, Arnold, is I think when I was in college with you, I don't think I recognized that you accompanied so much depth to the way that you see the world. And surely that's a part of your growing. Like, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
At this point, we're in our 40s. So I imagine that's a lot of life has happened in between there that informs how you come to be. But I am so proud of you, like to be able to see what feels like a definitive transition. You know what I mean? You see somebody at 19, 20 years old to now, it just feels like a definitive change in a way or whatever. But I love seeing you rise. I love seeing you use your influence for good. And I love the way that you kind of use your gifts. And express those in others too, especially within students and other educators. So that's my bio. But you tell me something about yourself and tell everybody else.
First of all, like I told you, I'm humbled. I'm humbled just to be invited here. I'm humbled at all the things that you just were rattling off. And you're right. It has been a lot of life that's been lived over the past 20 years. And I'm grateful for all of it. All of us evolve. And there's still a lot of growing that I have yet to do, and I'm excited for that. But I think you captured all of it. I am a lover of people first. I think that, when you start talking about being a minister and an educator, none of that stuff is important absent the love that you show for people, right? I think about, even in ministry, when you think about folks that only demonstrate anointing when they're on a pulpit with a mic in their hand. And I shudder and I shake in my boots at the thought of that because, we show God's love every day. And if we don't give me no mic. You know what I'm saying? Don't give me no microphone. Don't put me on no pulpit if I can't show the love of God every single day in what I'm doing and how I interact with God's people. So I'm humbled to be here, like I said.
Well, I'm humbled to have you. But where does that come from? Like, where does that orientation of saying that authenticity has to rise up first before you go any further, where does that come from?
I think it just comes from experiencing the opposite of that. And I am a preacher's kid, and I have profound love and respect for the work that my father has, and a lot of the folks that have come before me have shown me the way of ministry. But I've also seen a lot of folks who operate in one way in religious spaces, one way in church spaces, and they operate completely differently outside of those spaces, and it comes off as inauthentic to me. And I don't. That's just something that I've seen, and I've always said that part of it is something that I wanted to be the non-example. And the more you read scripture, the more you get close to God, the more you realize that that's nothing like how Jesus was in the first place, right? So I just think it comes from a whole lot of, long nights praying and crying and even celebrating and making sure that the love that I show to God's people reflects the love that God has shown to me. So that's where it came from.
So let's hop into some questions.
Yeah.
And I guess the first one, though this is not innately a religious podcast, I would love to know, because it's a centerpiece to how you inspire and influence. why did you decide to follow Jesus Christ?
Yeah. First of all, deciding to follow Jesus Christ is the center of every other decision that I've made in my life. It's the center of it. And deciding to follow Jesus Christ isn't just a religious affiliation decision. And I think some people put it in the box of just, deciding to follow Jesus is deciding to join a church, and it's not. Or it's deciding to join a particular denomination, and it's not. Although those things may be consequences of it, again, the more that I've lived, the more that I've prayed, the more that I've sought out who and what God is, I've learned more about Jesus Christ, and that decision kind of found me. Growing up in the church, it's almost like, was that a decision you made, or did you just kind of like grow up in it? And I'm sure that you can attest, like, there was a time where I wasn't really, carrying it like that for Jesus, you know what I'm saying, or for any kind of godly purpose. I was just living my life and doing my thing. But the more that I've come to myself and realized and looked around and realized how blessed I am and started to dig deep into why that is, for me, it was about the love that Jesus Christ has shown to me. So I didn't have an option. I have no other option, because anything else would be me being ungrateful. So I try to approach my life with a spirit of gratefulness, and that has led me to Jesus Christ and has kept me with Jesus Christ. So,
What I love about that is that beyond the religious story, right, or the story of like how you imbue Christianity or any of that, I think what I'm most impressed by is the mediums that you choose to be able to do that: music, education. Because I mean, singularly, there have been plenty of people who have just stood up at pulpits, and that has been the way that they address, their love. But you chose education, which feels like even more of a definitive choice. And granted, you just said, this has been the centerpiece of every decision you've made. But I do think that like being open to the various mediums that you can be able to influence is something that is incredible, to that end.
Yeah, because look, man, the vast majority of people, they're not going to church on Sunday morning, right? So, again, I shudder in my boots when I see folks that, call themselves a minister. And when I call myself a minister, I'm not talking about the work that I do in the pulpit exclusively. I'm not talking about that. When I'm at school and when you may see me in a 30 to 60 second clip, giving a high five or giving a hug, that's not absent anointing, right? That's not absent intentionality around trying to show to the people I'm engaging with and to those who may see what the love of God can look like and should look like. It doesn't always have to look like, and as a matter of fact, most time it doesn't look like, spitting rules from a book. It looks like, how are you showing love to people in this world with no expectation of anything in return?
Yeah, it was interesting. I'm a church kid, so you are PK. I'm not that extreme. I'm like a missionary kid or something else, or like that. Like, I was brought up by people that did nothing else but church. Like that was our 7 day a week thing. So there's an influence, but there's a different intensity, I feel like, to have to feel. I've never felt like I was responsible. Like, I feel like I could come and go as I please. And so many people had done it before me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there was no consequence to a legacy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To that or whatever, to some end too. But you mentioned a little bit about just reading from the book, which we would say in church is doctrine, right? So I also want to know, like, you've now amplified doctrine to not only be inside of the edifice of a church, but to also be able to like show itself up inside a schoolhouse with this curriculum that's steeped in love, where children are actually guiding the way, and you're using the best of yourself to be able to broker that. Tell me more about the curriculum of love. Why is love important? Why are you choosing love?
Yeah, I love this question. Love has to be at the center of whatever it is we do. I didn't start my career in education, right? I started off, I was a writer for some insurance company, and I was really good at it. I was successful, but I didn't feel fulfilled. It didn't bring me any kind of joy. So it's possible to be really successful in life and not fulfilling your purpose, your calling. And so, when, to make a long story short, when education found me, when I found my way into education, I really felt fulfilled because this was my chance. I felt like this is the chance that God has given me to use all of the gifts, everything that he's given me, to be able to give it back in service of just loving on folks. And I just think that anything you do, if love isn't at the center, it's not worth doing. That's not just with work. That's with anything. If love can't be at the center of your conversations, of your work, it's not worth doing. And so, you know, every day when I go to school, I just look at it as another opportunity to show love and receive love, because it's very reciprocal. I'm one who always wants to say, I don't want to make it seem like I'm going in these schools and, oh, these poor kids, and, oh, they must not have this or they must not have that. That's not the case, right? Our kids live in abundance, and I receive just like I give. And so just like I'm a giver of love, I'm very much the recipient of love, far more than what I'm able to give. So when I say love is the curriculum, I just mean that love is at the center of everything we do. Our students, our young folks can smell a fraud, right? They have discernment like nobody's business, right? And when something is done that's not authentic, they feel it. So we have educators, a lot of educators that go into these spaces, and they're telling our young people, you know, that they need to be courageous enough to live their dreams. But they themselves haven't been courageous enough to live theirs. So they can smell that. They're telling our young people that they love them, but our young people know what love feels like. And so I just try to be an embodiment of that. Sometimes they show me the way, and sometimes I'm fortunate enough to show them the way.
This is, you know what, this is why I'm so inspired by you and why I consider it growth, because in honesty, when we were at Lincoln, what I recognize is that I knew nothing about you.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like in that way. And when I say that, I mean, you could talk, you hang out, you might eat in the calf together, do all this other stuff or whatever. But the way that you even come to be, the journey didn't start 20 years ago. When I bet your journey starts when you were like a child and you're coming up or whatever. Talk me through a little bit of like just your coming to be. You know what I mean? In some ways or whatever. And also just to even clarify what I'm asking, you mentioned to me, I believe a little earlier, you are filling in the gaps of things that you had and didn't have. You know what I mean? So talk to me about like the haves and the have-nots of your life.
Yeah. And you're right. When I think about even my earliest memories were filled with love. Like, I think a lot of times, and I'm going to say a lot of times, Black folks, we tend to center deficit in our narrative. We love a bottom from the bottom story, right? We love a got it from the gutter story. And while that may be part of our narrative, I don't think that we should center that all the time. So when I think about my story, my earliest memories are filled with love. And even in terms of like my experience with learning, because education isn't just about what happened in school, right? So my earliest experience with learning, I remember sitting at the dinner table, and my father would come with, you know, the encyclopedia. He would just tell me to pick a letter, and we would pick a letter every week, and we would just study random things from the encyclopedia. And then he would double back the next week, and we would have conversations about what we read. And that didn't seem like something that was like school or like something that we had to do. It just felt like something that we did to build our relationship. But I was learning while we were doing it. My sister taught me how to read. My sister's a Lincoln grad. She taught me how to read, right? We would sit in her room, and she's 4 years ahead of me.
What class was she?
She was class of 01.
Oh, so she came right after I would have left or whatever.
Right.
I mean, she left right after I would have come.
Right. She was class of 01. And so, you know, I remember sitting in her room. We shared a wall, and I would go, and she would just make me come sit down, and she would play teacher. But that was my way to get close to her, and that was her way to get close to me. But she was playing teacher, and I realized that I learned the most from the people that I love the most. You learn the most, for good or for bad. You learn the most from the people that you love the most, and I began to like really embrace that at a very subconscious level, and that carried me through. So then when I finally got into education, I remembered. I pulled back on those memories of my father at the dinner table. You know, I pulled back on those memories of my sister in her room on her bed reading Miss Potato Head's new hat. And, you know what I'm saying? And going over all of my sight words. And I'm just like, you know, I want to create that experience and recreate that experience for a lot of our young people. Not saying that they don't have it, but I think that every space that people walk into, They deserve to feel loved. They deserve to feel accepted, and they deserve to feel joy, even in things that they have to do. Just because they have to do it, we should still be able to feel joy in those things.
It's so interesting too. Like one of the things that, so even when we talk about like your sister teaching you reading the things, what I start thinking about are first teachers, and I'm in a doctoral journey now, whatever. And my first thing that I was going to study was around this idea of first teachers, because I've always felt like, for some reason, I don't know why I took it this personal, but through my school journey, I've always felt like my family and my community was being disrespected in some way during that process, because I felt like I learned how to speak when I would do like the Easter sermon thing or whatever, when I'd be in Sunday school and we had to read back the things. I felt like I learned how to read when we were being literally forced to kind of like, you know what I mean, dig into the Bible and read these things and read them out loud and go into these things or whatever, or being in vacation Bible school, things of that nature. And then I also felt like being in my neighborhood, like I learned love, community, and some of the more intrinsic, which we would say soft skills about how to even navigate, you know, difficult situations, different temperaments. I learned that in my neighborhood. So I felt like my first teachers were disembodied from my own educational story. So I appreciate like that you are approaching this with reverence for what taught you how to be the you are today to some extent.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, just because, again, that has informed my approach even that much more. Not just what students learn from you when you're doing direct instruction, right? Students are learning from us all the time, just like we learn from folks all the time, right? We watch, you know, people watch and they learn, especially young people. They're looking at you. They're looking at the way you move. They're looking at the way you treat other people when you don't know that they're watching, right? And so, yes, the direct instruction is important, and we can't tell kids and tell young folks that they can be whatever they want and then deny them access to being whatever they want. I think that's oppressive. But at the same time, they're watching, right? They're watching how you treat each and every student. They're watching if you're giving out high fives and you consistently ignore one student. They're looking at things like that. So I have to approach it with a lot of respect and with a lot of reverence, because no matter what, good or bad, they're going to remember their teachers. We remember our teachers, for good or for bad. We can think back even now. I'm a 40-year-old man. I remember my first grade teacher.
What's their name?
Miss Matero. And I remember when Miss Matero got married. I remember we had to change from calling her Miss Young to Miss Matero. I remember my second grade teacher. That was the first time I was close to getting a B, which was just like, oh my God, it was the biggest, a devastation in the world for me at that time. And I remember how these teachers made me feel. I remember Mr. Irving. I remember Mr. Rowley, who was my favorite music teacher. I remember these people and these folks who have shaped me in such ways. And I don't remember the lessons that they taught me when we had a book in between us. I remember how they made me feel.
Yeah.
I remember how they engaged with me. So while, yes, I'm an educator and what we do in the text is important, but man, the way we leave people feeling, the way that we leave people feeling better and feeling like they can come back and we've built something that they're going to remember in a positive way, that's the important thing. Because that teaches people how they should navigate in the world, how they should treat other people in this world.
I love that, and I'm glad you brought up the names too, because as I'm hearing them, when you said, I was immediately going to say, who was she? You know what I mean? First grade.
Right.
So another point, another question I'd love to dig into this with you is the ideas of like black male educators. And I think for those who maybe listen to this and don't know, the statistics are, I don't know all the percentages offhand, but like the statistics are like incredibly like dire about how many black male teachers are actually in the classroom.
Less than 4%.
But thank you for that. But what I think is even more, and this is my own anecdotal understanding. I used to work with a charter network too in Philly, in administrative side or whatever. But the thing that I've always felt was most disconcerting is how black men are utilized inside of education as disciplinarian, as kind of like the dean of students, the person who is like, don't do this. It's almost like wait till your father gets home type of things or whatever like that, because these levels of like engagement they're not built off of a love for students, but they're also not built off a love for adults in some ways, and systemically, like you come into these spaces and you have to kind of express a new value for yourself. So in that, my question to you would then be, tell me more about what your view is on this reshaping our ideas of masculinity, and how do you think this reshapes the ideas of how Black male teachers are able to be are able to participate and lead inside of the schoolhouse?
Yeah, I think that's such a layered question, right? Because I think that the way things are in schools are very much microcosms of the communities that those schools are within, right? And the roles that men have played, in the home, even thinking about my own upbringing, and those of my friends and my closest family members. You're getting into to a conversation about gender roles and what that may look like, and how that may manifest in different contexts. But in schools, I didn't have a Black male teacher in all of K-12 until I got to high school, and I had a Black gym teacher, right? And so I remember when I first got into administration. I'm going a long way to tell this, but I think this part is important. When I first got into administration, I had left the classroom. An opportunity came for me to go into administration. A friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, I want to bring you on my team." He was the CAO. He was the chief academic officer of this really successful charter network in Philly. He said, "I want to bring you on to be my director of instruction." I said, "Okay, let's have a conversation." I went and had the conversation. Great conversation. I said, "Cool, let's do this." Within a week of me being there was so much turnover and transition in this network that he left, the CEO left, and I was just pretty much standing there basically alone. They hired a new CEO who just so happened to be a white man. He comes in. He had never met me. No, now, mind you, I had been doing the job, of a director of instruction, managing curriculum and teachers and all these things. And he comes in and he meets me, and the first thing he said to me is, he said, "Hey, well, what does your job entail here?" Because he was trying to get up to speed. Told him I was the director of instruction, and he literally looked at me. He said, "You look more like a dean of students. You look more like a dean of students." So, I resisted the urge to kind of like come right back at him. I said, "Well, I don't have any background in behavioral health management. Like, that's not my background. I have very much an academic background." He said, "Okay." He said, more or less, he said, "You're welcome to accept the dean of students position now, or you can find employment elsewhere." This is what he said to me. So in that moment, it was when I really realized how deeply embedded this idea of Black men being disciplinarians in our spaces is and what that looks like. I have never been a dean of students at any point in my educational career. To this day, I have parents come up to me and say, "Well, good morning, Dean Ford." To this day, I've never been a dean, right? I've never operated in that capacity. And I don't take offense to it at all, because I value the work of, that deans of students and creating a positive culture. I value what that work can and should look like. But I realize that that's coming from deeply embedded, systemically oppressive ways of thinking that we've adopted for ourselves, not just in school settings, right? It's not, in a lot of the school settings that I'm only going to speak of my experience, it's not always normal for us to be sitting at academic tables, right? It's just not. And so I value the table that I'm able to sit at, not in terms of just like wanting to assimilate and this whole idea of a seat at the table, like not in that way, but I just value being able to have a voice and for my voice to be heard by the young people that my decisions impact. The conversation around masculinity and how that looks, again, our young people are watching us. So when they see me engage, and every Black boy that comes in my door, I'm hugging them too. I'm giving them a hug too. I'm telling them I love them just like I'll tell my young Black girls that I love them, and I make sure that, what I'm saying, that they know that this is, we just have to learn and unlearn some things that are deeply embedded in our culture. And I think that if we can do that as early as 5-6 years old, I think that could be powerful.
I want to dig in a little bit more into masculinity too, because I think the hugs alone, like, love is controversial, like just broadly. So I think whereas you think is like
Good thought.
the curriculum of love is, oh my God, it's so necessary, we need it. I think also it's controversial because it comes with layers of stigma where I've even heard as I reviewed a lot of like the tape around like, your story and like your maturation in your career. It's been a lot of like, students when they come here expecting this because who knows where they get it at anywhere else, or who knows if they're loved in other places and this and that.
Why do we do this, man?
Well, I mean, that's a whole nother thing, which is going to take me to another question. But on this question of masculinity, you coming into the building and you being the first person that they see, you standing at that door, you giving out hugs, the students kind of waiting their turn to do that. I saw one young lady. She came into the door and she brought you like a sandwich, like a breakfast sandwich or something.
She broke me down. She broke me down.
And she was like, "I brought this," and you were like, "Oh, wait a minute, you brought this for me?" You're like, "Yeah." I think like those types of things just show that love really is a curriculum, but it also is incredibly controversial because we would love to think people believe in it. Everybody does not believe in love. They don't believe it. They have never seen it. They don't see it in these venues. And you're presenting something that's so controversial, in my opinion. But also, black men are controversial at the same time. How are you converging these two things? And you're essentially reshaping the idea of the way we see education, and then you're also reshaping the way that we see black manhood. Just talk to me about like the density of that.
Yeah. I love that thought, and I'm sitting with that, and I'm allowing that to sit with me. Love is controversial. And I think the thing that comes to mind when you say that is maybe a lot of folks have a very limited scope of what love should look like, right? I think it is my view that sometimes an embrace is not the result of love. An embrace can actually be a manifestation of hate, right? Given certain contexts. I think sharp words and speaking directly to someone doesn't necessarily have to be hate, but that can be a manifestation of love. Accountability can also be love. So I think we have to reshape and reimagine what love looks like to us and for us. There are ways, and I acknowledge this, there are ways that once you've built a relationship with someone, there are ways that you can speak to someone that you love that somebody else can't.
Yep.
You're not going to come in, when I was a young child, you're not going to come in my house and speak to me in a certain way while my mother's there, right? Without her having something to say about it. Yeah. But she can speak to me in that way just because of the love and the respect that was there that's been established. So I think that me as a black man, teaching to majority and virtually all of our students are black and brown students in our school, again, it's my obligation to show them what love looks like. And you're right, that can be very controversial. I look at some of the comments and, I can't help but notice a lot of folks, they talk about when I'm just walking down the hallway and a student may come and run up and give me a hug and then we go on about our day. A lot of folks are talking about, well, how is this allowed? How is this allowed in schools for, a teacher or for an administrator to hug on our students? It should be hands off. And a lot of folks say, oh, you'll be fired if you worked in my school. We're not allowed to. And that breaks my heart, right? Because I understand the place where a lot of that thinking comes from, but I lament the fact that we've gotten there to the point where we can't show love in those ways in our spaces with trusted people for fear that, intention is off or anything, whatever it is that they may be thinking. I don't even want to go down that road, but you're right, it is controversial.
Do you think that has anything to do with misandry? Like in the sense that like, we know there is deep hatred for women, and I think that's a pervasive topic. I think there is also ways that there, particularly with black men of color, that there's a deep hatred for our capacities. You know what I mean? How we fill space. Do you think that a part of that, because I know plenty of teachers who are women who hug students, who do lots of things. I also, without being controversial in my own thought, I've seen a lot of white men who do dances and things, and you've seen them too. There's been movies made about them. You know what I mean? They're waiting for Superman and everything else. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that have been, embracing students and this and that. And I don't think I've seen that level of,
commentary.
you know what I mean? So I wonder, like, is there a, we say misogynoir, but misogynoir, would that be a real thing? I don't know. But, like, is there, like, a misandry in there that, like, focuses particularly on your blackness that is, like, equated to those things?
I believe so. I think it would be naive of me to think that there isn't at least a small part of that that's at play. I try not to focus on that. Again, all I can do is what God called me to do. And I'm not speaking of hyperbole when I say my ministry is what I do every day. So when I'm going in those spaces, in the moment, I'm not, I'm acting, and I'm saying this as humbly as I can, I'm acting off of the anointing that God has placed on my life. And the call that this is what God has directed me to do, right? So I'm acting in that space, and I'm also very careful of it because I know it's a gift that I've been given. I'm very careful. There are some students that, just because of their own personal preference or boundaries, I just give them a fist bump. Or I just give them a handshake. And that's okay, right? But every interaction, it's not just the interaction with that student. I'm thinking about the interaction with their family, with their peers, with their classmates. I interact with the parents the exact same way you see me interacting with the students.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen that myself, and I just think that it's also, I think, as I've seen you state time and time again, students are actually directing the way that these interactions go. Like, it may seem as though you are the assertive party that's doing the thing, but students are telling you if they're up for it, if they're not up for it.
That's right.
Various different ways or whatever, too. And I think there's also something about there's also a thing with, like, black children, particularly how we want to give them agency to do wrong. We do not want to give them agency to be able to tell them how they want to be loved or cared for. Because we oftentimes will say, like, black kids, you know what I mean? Like, they, they, you know what you're doing. Or even sometimes, especially with black girls, is like, you know what you were doing. She's this and that. He's this and that. And he's a young thug, blah, 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 super predator conversations. All these things have been pervasive for decades, if not more than that, years, in that way too. But we don't necessarily give that same capacity to be able to say, like, you know what I mean? No, I know I want to be you know what I mean? Like, I want to be, like, supported right now. And I'm not even talking about just the hugs. The hugs, I think, are just one aspect of it. But it's like the communication, the talking with people. Like, I do want to be in these conversations. And I think when I was looking at a news report, a young girl in your school named Trinity was saying, when I don't get my hug, I'm going over to him and I'm saying, where is it at? What's going on? We got a problem. We got beef, whatever her conversation was to that end. So I think there's also something to be said. There's, a lot of things at play that are, you know what I mean, beyond the system of this or whatever. But there's also something really specific about how we put unfair binaries around students' ability to be able to know anything.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
And I say it all the time. I've said it in interviews. Vast majority of times, I'm taking my cues from them. Right now, I own my role as an educator and being a model of what I see to be love. But a lot of times, I take my cues from students. I'm telling you, they have discernment. They are joyful. They're not, And my thing about that is this, right? When I see comments like, that could be the only hug that they get, right? When I see comments like that, first of all, it's very much untrue, right? Very much untrue. But even if a student is very much loved at home and gets 30 hugs before they reach me, does that make them unworthy of having another one, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why does that even matter, right? And why do we have the mindset that that's what the reality is for our young black and brown boys and girls? I don't understand where that comes from. I do understand where it comes from, but I don't accept it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to accept that. So, like I said, I'm just blessed to be able to take my cues from them.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's also this idea of, like, refusing abundance, like, you know what I mean, the most appropriate ways or whatever. There's, it's so funny because as with the elections in Philadelphia, like the elections were going on, there was a lot of things about whether or not students should be working after school,
right? How
they should be engaging in this, how they should be engaging in this. Students should be in school during the summertime, have them during the weekend, do this and that. And I remember just thinking in my head, how reductive. How reductive to just have a place for them with no activity. You know what I mean? Like, it's just that level, that lacks the level of context I think you're adding.
We have allowed people who don't love us to define what success is for us. We've allowed systems and people that don't know us and don't love us to define what success is. And we've embraced it. And then when we try to push that out, we know something doesn't feel right about this. You know, ask any black educator. And we were having a conversation earlier, you know, the work that you see, you know, published on, you know, maybe on my page, it's not a one-off. This is not like this is in every single school where there's a black educator. This is what the norm is, right? But if you ask them and you ask them how their success is measured, all of them will state that there's a deep level of discomfort with how our success is measured by folks that don't love us, be it the state, be it whoever, right? And so I think it's on us to define our own metrics of success. What should the school experience feel like? Right? What should our lived experience in our communities feel like? Because school is just a really integral part of what community feels like. So what should that feel like? How do you want a child to feel navigating this space in this world? Right? You want them to feel safe. You want them to feel loved. You want them to feel joyful. And you want them to grow. You want them to feel challenged. Every kid has the right to be challenged. All those things can exist without making a kid feel less than.
Do you feel like that's a universal thought that we do want that for all kids?
A universal thought
around like us? We want kids to be challenged. We want them to be loved. Do you think that is a universal, that we want all kids to have that experience?
I think we say it. I think in theory, yes. I think in practice, no.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. I'm saying, everybody want kids to be challenged.
Yeah. This and that. I think if you were to ask any person that, then sure. But like, again, folks reduce our young people. They put them in boxes that they don't belong in.
And I think also we believe in rigor for the wrong reasons. Like, I think we've now made rigor a tool for displacement, which is like really kind of, and I mean, that's always been the case. Like, I mean, you think about like back in the day, we would take CAT tests. You know what I mean? And it would be like your test to make sure you were ready to go to the next grade or whatever. And, you know, you wanted to do well. And I remember my teachers at that time, you know, which I've been blessed to have a majority of black teachers, black and brown teachers or whatever through a lot of times. Not many black men, but like black teachers in general. But I will say that during those time frames, like I could sense over time as I grew going into high school that the concern about me being able to like be successful changed. You know what I mean? At different points. You know what I mean? Like it.
Based on what? Based on your.
Well, I think it just changed over time because I think what I imagine is happening is that like testing, like I've never been like a really good test taker. Like for instance, I was going to go to law school after Lincoln. I took the LSAT 7 times to try to like be able to get a 170 because I was like, then I didn't want to go to law school anymore. But of course, after 90 years of doing a test, of course you're over it. But like I've just never been like good at tests, so I've never thought that was my centerpiece. But what I have recognized is that sometimes the test scores or this and that or whatever, they're useful to some extent or whatever like that. But they're a tool to add like this level of rigor that really doesn't analyze like how students are actually learning inside the classroom. And it also doesn't leave room for what they're learning through a curriculum that you're building that is beyond just core subject matter. You know what I mean? Anyway, I might be going down the...
No, you're not. I mean, that to me, you're getting at the core of why I say love is the curriculum. I think it's very possible for us to have a school where we're just doing test prep and we're drilling and killing students on how to, be successful on a certain test. And I think that school would feel a certain way. And I also think it's possible to have a school where your focus is really on learning and building the whole child. And that school would feel different. And I think that the test results will be differently. By outsiders, the school would be viewed differently based on those scores. But to the experience of the school, I'd rather have school be. And I say all the time, we don't just enroll students, we enroll families. So, you can't engage with a student without engaging with their family, right? I want to talk to mom. I want to talk to dad. I want to bring them up. Let's have a conversation about what's going on. Let's partner, just because, a lot of times parents view schools based on their own experience with schools. And a lot of the parents didn't have great experiences in school. And so there's an inherent distrust that already exists that we got to break down. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
I'm gonna take a small break.
No, when I get nervous, I tell the truth.
So Arnold, I'm looking at my notes. I do have a question, because I think a lot of what we're talking about extends beyond students, and I think in some ways we oftentimes place this as like student level issues. Like, you know what I mean? Like, students need this, and students have to get this, and students need to perform in this way, and students need to do these things. And shout out to Dr. Stacy Holland at the Elevate 215 in Philadelphia. We were having dinner, and I was talking with her, and she said, my core question I've been trying to figure out is an adult learning question. So at first when she said it, I was like, oh yeah, PD for adults, of course. Like, they should have, like, we should have all the things too, or whatever. And what she was really saying was that, no, the core to a lot of the academic and social and behavioral issues that we're seeing are, a lot of it is based around adults not being able to reframe themselves given the experiences of students. So I do want to talk about, beyond like how you influence students, how do you feel like a curriculum steeped in love actually changes the adult learning process for educators and administrators in your school and beyond?
Yeah, I think that a curriculum steeped in love, and when you say love is the curriculum, I think it starts with a love of self, right? You have to love yourself. I can't express how important it is for our educators that are in front of our students to really love themselves and to be able to really identify the ways that they do that. When I interview people, I ask them what they love about themselves, and it catches people off guard. They're interviewing to be a teacher. I'm saying, what do you love about yourself? And to watch people kind of like struggle with that question is so interesting. But, again, it's important, just because in the adult facing thing, we can't give an inauthentic message to students that we haven't embraced for ourselves. We can't tell students, live your dreams, and we're pushing this on them, and we haven't been courageous enough to live ours, right? There are some ways that we do this, at our school, at schools that I've been at. I've been at schools where we have book clubs and things like that. And of course, this is outside of like PDs or things like that. But again, the adult culture and the way that the adults have framed what learning looks like for them is what translates to students. And I think that's of the utmost importance, for sure.
And I'm looking at my notes. I apologize.
Yeah,
I won't
no, you're
forget
fine.
nothing. So I do have some like kind of like not rapid fire, but like some definitive questions. Right now, I think we're in a space where like social media, this kind of new way of viewing the world is the only way to view the world. And something that was like a nice, I remember when I first got my first Facebook account, was like 20 years ago. It's probably 2004 or something like that, sometime like that. And I was in college, and it was only this, and it was just like, oh, this nice new thing that only we had on the side. And like in that time frame, we've had to grow into this space where like this is the medium. And for the students that you're teaching, like and working alongside of and educators, you have to have dexterity in how you approach these things. You now have approximately like 190 something, I'm sure like close to 200,000 followers on IG. People are like waiting for your IG lives in the morning to see what it is. They're looking for like the posts. I had Dylan, shout out to Dylan, my operations coordinator, look up all your hashtags and seeing like all the videos of you doing it, whether it's security footage or you kind of like showing it. And we know the responsibility that you have to students, to families, to your school, your fellow teachers, etc. But what do you think your responsibility is, or do you feel like you owe anything to the general public that's kind of viewing these interactions and viewing this curriculum too? Because this curriculum now has extended beyond man elementary.
For sure.
You know what I mean? It's now something that is bigger than that. Do you owe anything to that, or is it for people to just take and consume as they please?
I've thought about that question a lot as the following has grown, because it kind of took me by surprise when it happened. this isn't like something new that I just started doing, right? I've been posting these types of videos for years now. But so when it started to grow, I was honestly a bit afraid at first. Because again, this work I approach it with such reverence and such respect that I was like, man, I don't want to open the door for unfair criticism of the work. But I had to get over myself, right?
Yeah.
And I had to really, come to terms with the fact that, hey, if like I prayed about this, right? This is something I prayed about. Right before, and this is kind of like a side. I'll get back to the actual question, but right before things began to like really take off with the Instagram following, I was in prayer and I was setting some intentions for the year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I simply said, I want any representation of myself that I'm putting out there to the world, be it through social media or when people see me in a public space. I want to make sure that I have the platform to show the love of God. I want to make sure that I have my platform is something that people can look to see what love can look like outside of like traditional spaces. And 2 weeks later, my first video started going viral, and I began to see God's hand on that. I do feel a responsibility to be careful and to be any responsibility I feel. It's not because of the amount of followers that I've gotten. It's just because I'm putting out there what God has placed in my hand to take care of. And I want to be careful with it, right? I don't ever want to be reckless with something that God has given me. I don't ever want to mistreat something that God has given me. I'm that way with my friendships, with my relationships, and especially with the work of the ministry. And that's what this is. So the responsibility is not in like, man, I got to push out certain content because people's looking for it, or I got to make sure that I'm putting out X amount of videos because, I'm not doing it for that. But anytime that I do put something out, I just feel like I want it to be authentic, and I want people to be able to celebrate with me. All the content is based in like celebration. I want people to be able to celebrate the excellence that I see every single day. So sometimes it'll be about a lesson. Sometimes it'll just be us dancing in the hallway. And I think both things are important. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the thing with the social media, like the influencer kind of like space, is that it's been monetized to such an extent that it is its own industry. So I think even your way of approaching it, I know that like you have to be getting offers for like sponsorship and blah blah blah. I just know how this thing works in that way too. And how are you mitigating that? And I know you've mentioned time and time again, I'm not doing it for that reason. But how are you mitigating like the fact that there are people that want to tether the goodwill you're brokering to other interests in that way?
Yeah. To be quite honest, you're right. There have been those, brand ambassador offers and advertising deal offers, what have you, and I haven't accepted any. Just because at this point, I'm not saying that I never would, but at this point, I still want to make sure that I'm just centering the work. I don't even want myself to be in the center of what this is, because it's really not about me per se. So again, that is somewhat of a difficult thing to manage because again, it's social media, right? And that's literally sometimes, that's what it is. That's the gig. But to this point, I haven't even really tapped into that side of it. I just want it to be an authentic display of Black joy and love. Literally, that's all I want. When people come, when they scroll, I want them to feel a portion of what I felt in those moments. And the best compliment I can receive is, wow, that video really touched me because it reminded me of a time that I felt joy or a time that I was celebrated. That's the best compliment I can get.
I love that too. And I also think, like, hold on to that.
Yeah.
Because I think that eventually I have great belief and faith that everything you do will expand. You'll have an abundant, like, opportunity for yourself. You already are working with an abundance, but I know it'll increase. You know what I mean? I'd also just, it's so easy to lose like the introduction to things. And I know like every time I've had a great experience that's been like, even things that, to be quite honest, have been very lucrative, it's been a quick turn where I forget how to how to understand what I initially was doing. You know what I mean? So I want you to hold on to that.
Yeah, I will, and I appreciate those words. That means a lot.
So let me ask you too. So we talked about the followers. What are you surprised you made it through?
Man, that's such a good question. I'm not sure that I would necessarily frame it like I'm surprised I made it through this, but I, in some ways, didn't think I would make it through certain things. And that is the limited perspective of what God looks like in this world. And I say that not to cast any kind of dispersion on any walk, and any individual person's belief or how they perceive God. But I know that for a while I struggled, even as a self-proclaimed minister, I struggled with, okay, what I feel like God was calling me to do, what God looks like to me, and the gap between how I perceived God to be showing up in other spaces. Like I had to really come to terms with the fact that my perception of who and what God is can evolve. And for a while, I didn't think that my perception of who and what God is should evolve.
Wait a minute, step back. You didn't think that it should evolve. Tell me, I know I'm cutting your thought off.
No.
I want to know.
Yeah. So there was a time, I knew church long before I knew God.
Arnold.
I knew church. I knew church long before I knew God. And so when I started getting to know God for myself, and to know that the God that I was learning was so far away from a lot of things that I was seeing in church, it really shook me to my core, because I still loved the church. Right? And so I had to really come to terms with the fact that it's okay for that evolution to happen.
Yep.
And it wasn't easy. And it's something that sometimes I'm still going through now. Right? It's not an easy thing, because you're steeped in tradition. You're steeped in all these things that, are not necessarily bad things, but it's not necessarily God at the center of it.
Yeah.
Like everything that happens in certain churches, God ain't at the center of it necessarily. Sometimes it's just culture at the center of it. And I think that that's okay in certain spaces, but don't say it's God when it's something else. And so I'm really surprised that I have come to allow myself to evolve in my perception of who God is for me. Because God has protected me a lot of times, even from things that I was unaware of until much, much later. And some of those things that I've been protected from are even my own thoughts that I had about who he is or who God is. So
you, I'm gonna try not to turn this interview. I'm serious. I'm trying not to do it, but you're hitting on the growth area for me.
Yeah.
And the growth area is that I've grown up in church and I have been loved by God and loving God for as long as I can remember. And because I'm a queer man and all these other things or whatever, there's so many interruptions to what that looks like, and a lot of them are steeped in culture. They're steeped in, misplaced ideas of how doctrine should be engaged, et cetera, et cetera. But I've found that one of my biggest growth areas are people who newly find Christ and know his love specifically from a perspective of what he has done for them, not what they have been able to do with him. You get what I'm saying? And my life, having been there, I know a love of God that is surely one that has kept me. But I also know one where it's like we've been co-creating something. You know what I'm saying? And I think a lot of times in the newness of finding Christ, you are so appreciative, as you should be, and grateful for the gift. You know what I'm saying? And if you don't know it, you won't know it. You know what I mean? And this is for anybody, any religion. I'm sure I don't, prescribe for anybody else. But when you know that you would that's it, you ready to kind of co-create visions based on that thing. And I feel like sometimes I'm very judgmental over people who newly find Christ and hit the doctrine and hit the this and that and hit the know the Bible verses and I saw this and that. I'm kind of like, yeah, but have you worked with him yet? You know what I'm saying? Like really worked with him, not like let him simply just direct and move through you or whatever, but have you really worked with him? Have you gotten to that point? Because I think that that's a level of like spiritual clarity that, you know, is something. So anyway, I didn't want to go down the road, but it's just something that it just is literally a growth area for me. So you saying that is kind of like,
You're hitting the keynote. And I think that along this journey, I've realized really for myself that you can be busy for God and not close to God.
wait a minute.
You ate that.
Go ahead. I'm stopping.
You know, you can really be busy doing things for God and not have any closeness or proximity to God.
Jesus.
And so when you flip that, when you realize that that actually is the thing, that's the space that I existed in for so long.
Yeah.
And when I started getting close to God, that busyness turned more into intentionality with the things that I'm doing rather than just doing a bunch of stuff.
It's so interesting too because I work in mostly, you know, community-driven spaces, neighborhoods, pro-Black spaces, spaces where it's ecumenical in a lot of spaces, whatever like that, like crossing over multiple religions, things of that nature.
That's right.
And I think because of that, I don't lead with a direct lens of my work is being informed by my belief system, my spiritual education, my love for God and his love for me. I don't lead with that. I lead with work. I know that is that my work being a leader of work that I want to, you know, destroy anti-Black environments as best as possible. You know what I mean? I know that that's work that's defined by God. I know it's like a calling in that way.
Yes, it is.
And it's so hard because there are so many interruptions to being able to see that work, though it is through a different medium, though it's through a different person that is not the traditional Christian archetype, like it's shaped differently too. So anyway, I'm not going to live in that, but you got me fired up, and I'm now you got me acting like we in therapy. I'm gonna say that for Thursday. Say that for Thursday when I go.
I appreciate you.
So another question I have for you. What are 2 decisions you're glad Black folk made before you were born that are supporting your work today?
Yeah. So even with this question, one decision I'll take, you know, an overall collective Black folk decision. Another, I'll take a more deliberate decision from my family, right? So overall, I'm so glad that that Black folks decided to lean into loving ourselves in the way that we have. And when I say that, I know that there are a lot of ways that we still have to unlearn this deep-rooted self-hate that shows up sometimes in the most inopportune ways.
Yeah.
But I also recognize that when I'm thinking, when I'm looking back, when I'm listening to stories that my mother and my father talk about from their childhood and the ways in which Black folks showed up for each other, community, right? That community that Black folks live in, like the community of the Black culture of community among ourselves is something that is a deliberate decision. We decide those things. We decide in the ways that we show up for each other. And I'm so glad because I'm a product of that. Like I'm a product of the community that loves on each other in very sometimes unidentifiable ways to folks who are outside of the culture. But I'm really, really proud and happy that those decisions are made. And more directly, I'm just so happy of the decision of my direct family to pray for me in the ways that they did prior to me getting here. I know for sure as I'm sitting here, I'm the result of answered prayers. I'm sitting in spaces that people prayed for me to sit in. Before I even recognize what an answered prayer feels like, I'm the result of it. You know, I think about times when I was young. Some of my earliest memories are of me being young and coming up to bed after watching TV, and I would go in to say goodnight to my father. And I wouldn't be able to say goodnight because he would be on his knees praying. And I would be able to listen and hear him praying about me. Right? And so I would leave. I wouldn't say goodnight until later. And he would come out after he was done. He would say goodnight, what have you. But, you know, when I think about, sometimes I wonder, what things was he talking to God about? You know what I'm saying? Talking to God about me about. You know what I'm saying? What was he saying to God about me? And I just know that as sure as I'm sitting here, I'm sitting in the result of those prayers. And I don't ever want to take that for granted. So I'm grateful for that. And not just him, my sister. I'm not closer to anybody in this world more than my sister. And I know that woman prays for me. So I'm just grateful for the constant prayers that people have, you know, sent my way because, you know, I'm sitting in the answer prayers, man.
You know, it's so interesting too because I think it's something about growing up. I have this is probably it's a little bit shady. I feel like my generation is the last one to grow up with like real grandparents. No offense to nobody. I don't mean no harm to nobody, but like it's something about growing up with people who just had a deep responsibility to you being something. And I don't say that doesn't exist today. I just think that the depth in which it existed was just totally different. You know what I mean? Like I remember times where like my grandmother or like my Aunt Rosa or anybody would just be like praying randomly over things or whatever. They would come over to my grandma's house and just start praying and like howling at the thing and like you know you'd be sitting there like oh God. And as a kid you're like oh my God, like what are you doing now? This is so dramatic. But now it's kind of like Lord, I don't know how much that saved me over time. And I know I've been as much of a genius as I've been a fool. You know what I mean? And it's just one of those things where it's like that's what's sustaining. And I'm so glad you had that experience. So glad I had that experience or whatever. And I think it even makes the love curriculum even more powerful because the prayer may look different, but it's still a prayer.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. And I love that, you know, I'm able to now embody that and incorporate that in my approach. And it's not based on, again, my father he'll probably see this and be like, I didn't know you used to do that. I used to do it all the time. And he didn't know. He wasn't doing it for me to hear it. He was doing it just because he loved me. Yeah. So now I'm able to do that. And my students don't know. A lot of times, you know, when I'm giving them a hug, I'm whispering a prayer. You know, I'm saying bless them today. You know, allow them to feel joy today. You know, no matter what they experience, whether they experience joy or struggle, like allow them to feel joy today. Bless them to max out their capacity today. You know what I mean? So, and that doesn't just go for, and I think it's important for me to say, because my school had such a high percentage of non-Christian students, high population of Muslim students. And, you know, it's just, again, love is the curriculum. Ministers or whoever who only feel or demonstrate the anointing in churches and spaces with a bunch of people who are going to say amen to their doctrine, I think that's dangerous. I think it's dangerous. If the only time you're showing love and showing the result of the anointing on your ministry is to a bunch of people who are going to say amen to you, we're missing the mark. So
it's very interesting because and I've written this in every like personal statement I've ever had to write, is something to say like, how did you get to this point or whatever? My grandmother started for the AME. I'm AME is my denomination, and she started the first that we know of in at least the first district, the first like HIV and AIDS ministry in like 1988, 1989, something like a long time ago when it was like hugely a big thing or whatever. And I remember this guy coming in to get clothes. She had a soup kitchen. She was like a head of our missionary society. So she had like a soup kitchen, all this other stuff. And I remember there were people in the church that just said, you know, Lou, you better not do that. You know what I mean? Like, you better not do that. No. You get it from him touching you, and you can do this and that. And I don't know what my grandma's here because she born in 1930. You know what I mean? Like, what is telling her? And this is also about my thing about the newness in Christ versus like a seasoned approach to it. Why I kind of like have I got to find my way through it because, you know what I mean? To your point about, I'm relating this to, and I'm not relating this in any way uneasy, but to the fact that when you're saying like, even people that are not Christian, I'm still there. That's the work. Even people that, if your identities and everything that you've been taught, and let's just stick straight with church culture, you know what I mean? Gayness, queerness, you know what I mean? The you know what I mean? Disease, all this other stuff are things that are those people, not our people type things. Early in my own education has been everybody, if you're doing it right, everybody should be able to experience that. And it's your job to get into it. So that feels like a deeply authentic, but also it feels like the best part of the old school. You know what I mean? Like we said, old time religion. Like it feels like the best of the old stuff that I grew up on. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love that.
Let me sorry. Hope they're not seeing my.
Sometimes my business ain't your business.
I might have to make this a tight shot. So talk to me about like your dream for yourself, your dream for your community. Let me just even preface a little bit with saying Black dreams, I think, are under-resourced. And I think even in this month, it's February, it's Black History Month. People see this during the course of Black History Month. We have a Black Studies scholar. You know, there's a lot of Blackness that is derived from history. And history is important because even as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of, I forgot her name, I think it's Tessie. But in Dr. Jarvis Given's book, Fugitive Pedagogy, he talks about like the early experiences of a Black woman teacher having two books in her lab. One is a school book that they told her to read out of for students, and the other one was a book, I think of Du Bois or something to that end or whatever that she was reading out of. And this experience of love was also a dream that she had, a dream that this next generation of students is going to have something totally different, that they're going to do that. And if it's going to be me having to be a fugitive in this educational system and really kind of be an abolitionist from the chains of that, I'm going to do that in the best ways I can do. And it came to the point that the students even knew to do, so they would even like follow on when somebody came in to try to check her. They'd be like, no, we were just learning about 1, 2, 3. We weren't learning about, you know what I mean, the revolt, you know what I mean, like type of thing. That's a dream, right?
That's right.
I know you have dreams that extend for education. I'm sure you have dreams that extend for yourself. I want to know more.
Yeah. First with education, I've done and I've read a lot of work around the purpose of schooling, even in the context of this country, right? Dr. Kamika Royal's work, I just got finished reading that, Not Paved for Us. And when you really boil down to the purpose of schools, you realize why things are the way they are in the context of our schools. My dream is to not leave this earth having to operate within that structure. Because right now I'm operating within a structure that was designed to kill me. Essentially, It wasn't designed with my success and my liberation in mind,
or your life,
or my life. Right? The system doesn't have regard for Black life, for Black joy. So, of course, there are things that are not in place. So, anything that we do, we're still operating within the context and the structure that's designed to eliminate us, to eliminate our existence. So, my dream is to not always have to do that. And I want to be able to put things in place, even if I don't see it in my lifetime. I want to be able to at least add a brick to the new building. Just let me add a brick to it so that later on, we don't always have to exist within this context of trying to justify our existence to people who hate us. Personally, I know that's a lot. So personally, I think the biggest way that we change the world and change systems is through family. So I know just as sure as I'm sitting here, I know that God created me to be a good husband and father in that order. And I'm really intentional when I say that because I'm not yet a husband or a father. You know what I'm saying? But I will be, because I know that is why God placed me here, to change the world through my family. And I've been doing that work in schools and what have you, but the next level of that is for me to do that with my own family. So I'm working on it. You know what I mean? I'm working on it.
I mean, I'm sure like that's the goal, but I love that, you know, sometimes what I love about the way that your imagination is that there are ways that you could clearly build what you do out bigger than what it is perspective wise, like bigger in like reach and this and that or whatever like that. And you could be advocating for, I want to open up the next school, and you know, LeBron James come to Philadelphia, it's the Arnold Ford School. Like you could be doing all those things. There's a choice in wanting to be constrained in the most appropriate ways. You know what I mean? And even when you're saying it's like, I want to put one brick in the building, like I want to see like these dreams happen, but before I go anywhere else, I want to see it happen with my family. Like your imagination is huge and also like intimate. You know what I mean? Like, and that is a gift, Arnold. Like it honestly is. That's a gift to be able to have. Talk me through like the dream, but like Black futures in general. Like what's your imagination for the future of black folks, Black people, Blackness?
It makes me emotional to think about, because when I think about how my dreams have evolved and the things that once were the center of my dreams, and how that was just such a manifestation of me not knowing myself and not knowing who it is that God was calling me to be. You know, it makes me emotional to think about how we can dream and reimagine the world that we live in, not from a lens of deficit. We don't have to just have a lens of, because we don't have X, my dream is to have X. You know what I'm saying? We can dream in spaces of abundance. We can dream and say, you know, I want to build out this, you know, this joy that we feel. You know, I think about the HBCU experience, and I've had both. I started at University of Delaware, came to Lincoln University. And it's something that I've been trying to put into words to quantify the feeling of the Blackness of being around your folks and that love. And still existing in a context, even at an HBCU, of this system wasn't designed for us. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I think about, and I know I'm going a long way to answer this, but I think about a conversation I had with Dr. Linnell Dade at Lincoln's campus. And I took her class, Black Psychology. And that class changed my life because, you know, sometimes we have this mindset of, you know, being at HBCU, this is our context. She said, don't be misled that this is now all of a sudden our context. We're still qualifying and saying that this course is Black psychology. But general psychology is something, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't represent us.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, even that just one mindset, I said, wow, just even in spaces where we exist, and we are celebrating one another and we feel this joy, it's still with this overarching feeling of something is off, right? Something, and you feel it. I feel it. You feel it when you walk into schools. You feel it when you walk in so-called Black neighborhoods. And I might get in trouble for this. You feel it when you walk into so-called Black churches. Something, what is this, right? And so I just dream of really capitalizing on the joy and the love that exists in our culture and expanding that. You're right that like there is a space to expand, but it cannot go beyond what we do at home first. It can't go beyond that. So I get emotional when I think about it, because anything that we give is only a small portion of that which we've been given. You know.
First of all, shout out to Dr. Dade.
Love Dr.
I took
Dade.
her Black psychology course twice. She failed me the first time. I appreciate you for that. She also wrote my both of my letters when I was applying to PhD programs.
Wow.
And we added inside of there or whatever too. When I met Dennis, he was not a good student. And then he became one. So.
Wow. That's awesome.
But I love her for that.
Yeah.
So look, I posted a preview of this on IG,
Yeah,
and asked for questions. I got one that I felt like was really poignant. I want to read it to you. Ask him, how does he deal with difficult parents? And don't let him say he doesn't have any. Difficult as in combative, disengaged, unresponsive, etc.
That is a good question. We do have difficult, in the way that it was described there, we do have difficult parents. But again, I approach difficult parents first seeking to like understand, okay, what is it? Like, what is it? What is the barrier here? Because some parents are difficult and they need to be. Because again, they feel that something is off, you know?
Yeah.
And I need to make sure that I'm not so blinded by the work and like, oh, don't you know how much I'm trying to do for each other? No. Let me understand what it is that is making this parent have this reaction, because they have every right to feel whatever it is that they feel.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it's just a matter of, you know, understanding the context with which they see things versus the way we see things and coming to a happy medium. And sometimes it doesn't always happen. Sometimes we just don't see things eye to eye. And I have to respect that. So in terms of like how I deal with them, it's case by case. You know, I think the biggest thing that you can do is build relationship outside of conflict. You know, if the only time you're building relationship is in the midst of conflict, then, you know, that relationship is going to be very limited in scope and you don't have any equity.
Yep.
Right? You have nothing to pull from.
Yep.
But if you've been building relationship and being intentional about it, now when conflict arises, now there's a little bit of assuming the best that you can kind of draw from. Now you got equity. Now you can kind of draw from things, and so can they.
Yep.
And they can also. I think that's just part of the gig. I think it's impossible to do this work without having conflict with parents, conflict with students, with other staff members, with other teachers. You know what I mean? It's just, that's the nature of existing in this world. We can both want the same thing and be dead set against one another on how to get there.
Yep.
It's just part of existing in this space. So I think that, you know, one of the inclinations of some teachers is to be so dead set on what their intention is that they're blinded that it could be coming off differently to a parent.
Yep.
You know, I had a conversation with one of my teachers. We had parent-teacher conferences just this week. And one of the teachers just texted me. He's an amazing black male educator. And he said, man, and again, I'm talking teacher of the month. I'm talking one of the best teachers that I have seen in a while. And he sent me a text message and he said, man, you know, some of the parents was just saying, you know, my kids like you, but they say you come off as really mean. You're coming off mean, and your class is really hard. And so he said, you know, that was difficult for me to hear because, you know, I feel one way and da-da-da, but he was really self-reflective about it. And just like, okay, I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to adjust this and that. But again, from my perspective, if a parent was to come to me and complain about this teacher, my first inclination might be, you don't know what you're talking about. But actually they do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Actually they do. And impact over intent. So I think that dealing with difficult people is just part of the gig.
So Arnold, we're at the end. I really enjoyed this, but I do have like want to give you space. Anything else you feel like you just want to get off your chest, want to say anything in that way or whatever, reflective of our conversation? And I have one last question for you.
Yeah, I would like to say that I have appreciated the various lanes that we've gone down with this conversation. I appreciate you giving me the space to be vulnerable and talk about some things that, you know, I don't always get a chance to talk about. A lot of times when people talk about the work, especially since things have kind of popped on Instagram, you know, people want to minimize the work to a hug. You know what I'm saying? They want to minimize the work that I do to like a 30-second interaction with a student or what have you. So I appreciate the line of question that you've had, because it's so much bigger than that. You know, it is so much bigger than that. When I say love is the curriculum, it is with intentionality. I'm very deliberately saying that. And again, I never shy away from saying that it's because I was called to do this work and God has anointed me to do this work, and I'm leaning into it the best way that I can.
I appreciate that. Dylan, if I can ask you to hold up that sign for me. So Arnold, in my last book, which is called Blackwashed, I had a quote in there that was in my introduction that said, "Black life is a carnival and a sanctuary, showcasing our journeys through joy and pain, through eras of bloodstained glass, and that alone is worthy of celebrations." And I really think this idea of like being worthy of celebrations is incredibly important, because sometimes I don't think we always know we are worthy of that. So I want to ask you, what do you feel like you are what is worthy of being celebrated from you? What do you think is something that's worthy to be celebrated? Similar to the question that you asked in the interviews around, what do you love about yourself? What's worthy of being celebrated about you? And what do you think we might be missing in our ability to celebrate, more globally?
Yeah.
Thanks, Dill.
I think that, and I love this question. Again, it does kind of go to, the what do you love about yourself? But in terms of being worthy of being celebrated, that evolution that I was telling you about earlier, I think that for me, that's the thing that I am leaning into celebrating most about myself, that I'm willing to look at things differently than maybe I once did. And I know that that may seem like a small thing, but especially in the context that I'm coming from, I think that that's so worthy of being celebrated, because I've experienced people and places and things that didn't really give you the space to do that. People have a perception of who you are and often want to box you into that based on whatever designation they give you. Oh, you're a teacher. I know how teachers act. You're this. Oh, you're a minister in a Christian church. Okay, you are this. And sometimes when I allow myself to act outside of whatever perceptions and boxes that people have me in, it sometimes catches people off guard, but I appreciate those moments, because we have to be able to reimagine so much about our worthiness and the worthiness that we have inherently and innately about, celebration of our lives is not something that has to necessarily be earned repeatedly, right? I think sometimes we look for perfection when we're wanting to celebrate, and we don't, in the context of schools, we have this proficiency mark with these state testing, right? And there are some students who, when we take the state test, they're not going to be proficient. And there are some students that are going to be labeled as proficient or advanced, and we're going to have these celebrations. But there are some students who are going to try their best. They're going to put everything that they have, and they're not going to make that so-called proficiency mark, and we're still going to celebrate the hell out of them because they deserve it. You know what I mean? And not just on merit of achievement based on people who don't love you. I'm going to celebrate things about you, small things. I'm going to celebrate that you showed up today. That you're worthy of being celebrated because you decided to show up when you didn't have to. You decided to engage with this text and you didn't have to. You decided to, overcome whatever situation may have happened at home. And that's worthy of being celebrated also. So for me, and for the students that I serve, for the people that I serve, the worthiness that we have is innate, regardless of whatever kind of achievement metrics they put on us from people who don't love us.
Arnold, this has been a brilliant conversation. You are a brilliant person. I really appreciate getting to know you beyond the veil of like social media pushes and things of that nature. I oftentimes, when I see posts that you post, I'll write down that you are covered in oil, and I believe that very much so. That's a churchy term for anybody who don't know. But like, I feel like there is an anointing that is just like so boldly apparent that like I want you to continue to just embrace that, and whatever is guiding you, whatever is like pushing you, please continue just to keep on doing that, because it is necessary that we see people who are imbuing their life's purpose through these lenses that are also pro-Black, that are also like inviting us into a new space. So I just appreciate you for that. Thank you so much for being with me.
Yeah, I thank you. And I want to say just, this last thing, you saying that you don't really understand the impact that even those words have, because it took me a while to be able to openly acknowledge things like anointing in the space and in the ways that I acknowledge it, because again, I was conditioned that anointing looks one way. Anointing is if I can get in that pulpit and I can grab the mic and I can be backed up by the B5 Hammond organ and I can have people fall. Oh, that's anointing. But anointing also looks this way. And so for me to be able to even have the wherewithal to acknowledge that and to have it be acknowledged by somebody else, it means the world to me. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too.
Thank you.
Arnold think he gonna be the last person to talk on my podcast, and that's not the
We sure ain't got a whole lot of time.
I'm joking. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for tuning in to I Get to Decide. You can learn more at www.com. IGetToDecide.com. Learn more about Invest Black, a racial equity company, at www.investblk.org. And if you have any questions, want to be a guest, want to suggest anything, you can reach out to my operations coordinator, Dylan, at yo@IGetToDecide.com. Arnold, thank you so much for the love. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Peace. All right.
Man.
Eric, we're done. Okay, cool.
Do you want to sign in there? Are you good?
Yeah, you can put whatever you want in there. You can bring the whole thing.
I'm saying you said you wanted to sign in there.
Oh, did you want to?
Oh, no.
Oprah coming next. Once I establish this as a place of truth, oh yeah. Watch. God's people ain't that few.